So, welcome everyone. My name is Laura Manley. I'm the administrative resource here at EPN, where the church gathers. We're so happy to welcome you all to this workshop about building stronger endowments through collaborative leadership. I just have a couple procedural items before I turn everything over. So, first, the session is being recorded. You'll all receive an email with a link to the recording, and any additional materials that the panelists have provided for us and then we'll post them to the website. We try to get this out within 48 hours. Usually it's less, but technology happens. Also, we've disabled the Q&A function for all of our workshops. So if you could please put any questions you have in the chat, the panel will answer them during the session as they have time. And there'll be a transcript of that chat with all of the questions and any other information posted there alongside the recording on our website. So thank you all again for being here. And I'm happy to introduce Ann Richardson, who's the Senior Director of Endowment Management at Episcopal Church Foundation. And she's going to start off the conversation for us. So Ann, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Laura. It is a pleasure to be back here on an EPN webinar. As Laura said, my name is Ann Richardson. I'm the Senior Director for Endowment Management at the Episcopal Church Foundation, or ECF, and I'm joined today by Kirsten Sierk, who's the Executive Director of Endowment Management at ECF. Karsten and I have done a number of webinars together over the last few years, including for EPN. And one of the things that we have learned about this audience in particular is that you all like to have time for discussion and to ask questions. So we have kept this formal presentation today relatively short. We're expecting to take about 35 minutes so that we can have time at the end to review any questions that you've submitted in the chat and answer them to the best of our ability in this time together. And to answer one question that I know we will get that Laura alluded to, yes, we have made our slides available to EPN and they will be posted on EPN's website after this webinar. So before we dive into our topic today, I do want to spend just a moment to give you some background on the Episcopal Church Foundation, or ECF. So ECF is an independent nonprofit. Our sole mission is to support Episcopal organizations. We have offered endowment management services to Episcopal organizations for over 25 years. And the way that we do this is by coupling endowment management or investment management with support for critical other aspects, developing appropriate structure and governance of your funds, and then a plan to encourage new gifts to those funds. It's really all three of these pieces, investment plus structure plus giving, that are critical for successful endowment management. And at ECF, our comprehensive services cover all three of these areas. We are very fortunate to work with a number of churches all across the country. Today, we manage on behalf of over 370 Episcopal churches, schools, dioceses, and other nonprofits more than $800 million. And in our role as an advisor, we help vestries, boards, committees at churches understand their funds. We explain fundamental principles of investing to leaders at churches. We support churches in the selection of their investment strategy. And very importantly, one of the things that we seek to do is to help churches and other Episcopal organizations improve their communications, which is really the topic of our webinar today. So in this presentation, we are going to be talking about and focusing on roles that are most common at churches, but the same principles that we are going to talk through apply if you're joining on behalf of an Episcopal diocese, an Episcopal school, or other similar organizations and their boards. You may just need to think a little creatively about how the committee or group that we're referencing applies in your context. And please know that we are always happy to hear from you directly about what's going on with your organization and see how we can help. At the end of this presentation, we'll be sharing our contact information and would be very happy for you to reach out. So, turning to our topic today, every single day, the members of our endowment management team at ECF talk to churches from all around the country. And while every church that we talk to does have something unique going on, there are common themes that we hear. And among these common themes are a desire for a greater understanding about church resources, for better communication among leaders, and for shared vision and goals for the future. We know that talking about money in church is hard. And it's hard for many reasons, including just that in our broader American culture, money can be a pretty difficult topic. So, one of the things that this difficulty in talking about money can lead to is a fragmented culture, like these scattered puzzle pieces that you see here on this slide, representing perhaps that leaders in different groups can hold anxieties, concerns, hopes about their church that they struggle to talk about together. So maybe where you are, one refrain is how there's not enough. Maybe it's your treasurer who's saying that there is some sort of a gap between the anticipated expenses that you have at your church and then the giving that you can expect. You could actually close that gap from either side, right? You could seek to reduce expenses, or you could seek to grow revenues, or even try to do both. But if the refrain that the vestry is giving out is that the parish and the congregation can't be asked for more, then you will probably focus on only one side of that gap in trying to resolve challenges. And so often when we talk to churches, we hear sighs or disappointment over perhaps how little the church is spending on outreach. And that could be true, or it could also be a reflection of the fact that folks have really focused on accounting categories and their classifications and haven't made the connection to how spending on people and property is foundational to many of the outreach ministries that churches run. And then there can be a tendency across these groups or other groups at the church to say, our endowment and other long term assets will be the solution to whatever problems we have. While the endowment committee, who is charged with overseeing those assets, is wondering, are the distributions that we're taking today even sustainable? So I would say it is pretty difficult to have a healthy endowment with this type of fragmentation. But what even is a healthy endowment? And what kind of approach could you take to avoid being so disjointed and all the problems that can come along with that? Things like poorly informed decisions, or maybe even in some of the worst cases that we have seen, resentment that develops among the leaders in these groups. So I'm going to turn now to Karsten to share three components of a healthy endowment and also to outline a framework for a better approach to managing for a healthy endowment.
Great. Thank you, Anne. So it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. So a healthy endowment has three core components. First, and sort of most obviously, most critically, a healthy endowment balances growth and spending, meaning that the church is able to take an annual distribution to support its mission every year without using up the funds gradually over time. There's a lot of nuance in that sentence, and I just want to acknowledge that. But right now, I want to keep it to that simple description. Second, a healthy endowment is one in which the congregation understands and really buys in to what the endowment makes possible for the church. So much so, in fact, that some of them are so excited and so supportive that they plan to make their own gifts to the endowment either now or at some point in the future. And then finally, and this is our topic today, a healthy endowment is managed with an understanding of how it fits in with all of a church's financial assets. It's not managed in isolation from other sources of revenue or other sources of funding. And it's also managed with up-to-date knowledge of the church's specific goals and specific needs now and expected over the future so that church leaders can make accurate plans and informed decisions as they carry out their responsibilities around these funds. Of course, these are the fiduciary responsibilities that come with managing the assets of an institution. So this last point about fitting in with other resources seems painfully obvious, perhaps, but in our work with hundreds of churches here at ECF, we see that a lot of churches are not yet doing this consistently, which is why it's worth focusing on today. So I just want to give one fairly quick example. A church might decide to invest fairly conservatively, and that can be a perfectly fine decision, but then later start to spend more from the endowment than planned. And so at that point, you need to ask, are the budget people and the investment people talking together? Are they talking about whether they need to change the investment approach, or maybe whether they should bulk up a reserve fund, for example? Maybe they are talking, maybe not, but we think they should, to make it more likely that the endowment will remain healthy. So what's the right approach to make that happen? It is an approach that is collaborative. So each group shown here, Vestry, Endowment Committee, Treasurer, Clergy, each one has a role to play in creating and sustaining a healthy endowment. And then with a collaborative approach, these four groups are each going to bring their specific knowledge, specific expertise, specific goals, and those are going to vary across these four groups. They need to then communicate with one another regularly and genuinely. And they work together as a team, obviously, meeting separately and fulfilling their standard responsibilities, but also acknowledging that they need information from one another so they can acknowledge their distinct roles, respect their specific responsibilities and their specific knowledge while learning from one another and balancing different objectives and different points of view to best inform the decisions that are made around the endowment. So now I want to start looking at each of these specific groups in turn, starting with the vestry. We're going to look at each group's roles and responsibilities, and then focus on the opportunities of each group to be part of collaborative leadership. So the vestry is obviously the primary governing body of a church. It is ultimately responsible for an endowment, regardless of who else is involved. Members of the vestry are the fiduciaries of the organization. As a result, they must comply with various fiduciary standards, one of which, as you I'm sure know, is, and very importantly, is a standard of care as they carry out their responsibilities. Their main focus should be strategic. What are these funds? What do we need them to do, and how will we do this? This is the group, the vestry, with the broadest oversight of the church and the broadest set of information about church goals and church needs. As a practical matter, they will likely delegate certain responsibilities to an endowment committee or an investment committee, either name is fine, which will do the detailed work, as we're going to explain on the next slide. But the vestry must oversee that committee. It must ensure that the committee's actions are within the scope of delegation, and it must look closely at, and I mean really understand, the committee's reports back to the vestry. Oversight is not a passive activity and requires a good working relationship with the committee, where the vestry can honestly ask whatever questions it needs to ask or wants to ask. So let's look now at the vestry's specific responsibilities. They must understand the nature of the endowment funds, including the source and any restrictions. If the church sets up a new fund, they're in charge of approving that. They also need to ensure compliance with any restrictions on the funds. That's a big topic for another webinar, but we do a lot of work with churches that need to better understand restrictions. It's not always quite so easy. As discussed before, obviously the vestry sets up the committee. They also approve some of the most important decisions. Who will the investment manager be? What should be in the investment policy statement, and they also approve the spending rate. The committee is going to make recommendations in these areas, as we'll discuss shortly, but the vestry, as the group with ultimate responsibility, needs to approve them. Finally, I want to highlight opportunities for the vestry. Here is where the collaborative leadership can start to happen. So the vestry can set expectations and model behavior. If you want a collaborative church, let it start with you. Likewise, they can also embrace transparency and expect it of others. That's a huge part of what makes collaboration possible. Then moving on to the idea of new leaders, every church needs new leaders to step up into leadership roles, but part of welcoming them is making sure that they have training. What's the role? What's the information? What information do they need to carry out the role? You as the vestry, you can demonstrate how to welcome new leaders and really help them shine in their role. Next up, the vestry can take the lead, certainly working with others, to make sure that the church has the endowment fund that you need. You might already have one endowment fund or an endowment fund for a specific purpose, and let's just say that's your building. But maybe you also want an endowment fund that you could use for any purpose. The vestry has the opportunity to talk with the other groups that we're talking about here today to identify what types of endowment funds a church might need and then assess if the church can gain assets for those funds. And then finally, from time to time, the vestry should create a financial plan with goals for various time periods, short-term goals, medium-term, long-term. This helps move everyone to a strategic focus and can provide a written document to come back to anchor later decisions. So let's move on now to the endowment or investment committee. As we've shown here, they have really a huge role to play. So the committee is a creation of the vestry. The vestry delegates to it certain specific responsibilities, and those are ideally set out in a written policy. In general, the committee is the group that really digs into the endowment. They review and analyze the investments, and they make recommendations to the vestry, as we've previously discussed. Most importantly, they bring time and expertise that the vestry may not have. So looking here at their specific responsibilities, they monitor the funds and they monitor the investment manager. They also report regularly to the vestry. And as mentioned a moment ago, they make recommendations to the vestry on the most important matters: the investment manager, the investment policy statement, and the prudent spending rate. Finally, they also oversee all distributions from the investment account back out to the church once that spending rate is sent. So now I want to flag opportunities for this committee. Certainly, you want to align your recommendations with current goals. Don't just say, endowments should be handled this way. Instead, potentially say, after talking with the treasurer and the rector and the vestry, we have learned, whatever. And as a result, make the following recommendations. Already right there, you are connecting the endowment to church goals and church needs and doing so in a collaborative manner. Make sure the other groups understand what an endowment is and how it works. There are so many slightly incorrect beliefs out there. You all are the experts. Lean on your manager if needed and help everyone understand. One specific example in this area is the idea of prudent spending, or how much you can spend each year without starting to deplete the funds. By talking together, you can help the other groups understand what is a realistic distribution and why. You are also the voice of the long term. Others of these groups, others will understandably be focused on this year or next year. Remind them that the church also has long-term plans and long-term obligations. And finally, you know now that a church with a healthy endowment is getting new endowment gifts, not just managing old gifts. That's an aspirational goal, but one that is certainly well within the reach of every single church. Take the lead in figuring out how the church will promote the endowment and solicit new gifts. You don't necessarily have to do this work, but raise it with the other groups here, find someone who will take it on and work together on this effort. Now I'm going to go back to Anne to review the other two groups in collaborative leadership, the treasurer and the clergy.
Thank you so much, Karsten. So again, I'm going to follow this model that Karsten has laid out and take a moment to discuss the specific role and responsibility of the treasurer, particularly in relation to the endowment, and then some opportunities that the treasurer has as part of collaborative leadership. And then I'll do the same for clergy. So I hope that there are some treasurers on with us today. And if there are, then you know that you have a really big and really important role at your church because you have been delegated authority to handle the organization's finances. So you are developing a budget. Yes, the vestry is going to approve that budget and again, ultimately is responsible for it, but you are really the linchpin in making sure that that happens. Then you are dispersing funds under that budget and regularly reporting to the vestry, reviewing budget versus actuals throughout the year in your conversations with them. And thinking specifically about the endowment, which is what we're here talking about today, it is so important that the treasurer have insight into what the endowment committee is going to recommend as the disbursement for the following year, and then reflects on how those funds can be spent. Again, they may be restricted to certain purposes or they may be unrestricted. All of that information is going to inform your process in thinking about the church's financial plan. So even if the treasurer at your church is not a formal member of the endowment committee, they should absolutely be in touch with that committee so that they can connect that committee's plans to parish goals and the development of that overall financial plan. So responsibilities that treasurers have in connection with endowment assets, obviously you're ensuring that the reporting about these assets, changes in their value, any contributions and disbursements are properly recorded in the accounting system. And then of course, officially being the one to disperse the funds from the endowment for the purposes as determined by the vestry. And you have a lot of opportunities as the treasurer in taking a collaborative approach to a healthy endowment. If I think about the treasurer's vantage point in the organization, especially among all of these four groups we're talking about today, you are in this unique place because you really see the full financial picture of the church. And so when you report to the vestry, you can cover that full financial picture, meaning not just spending your reports talking about budget versus actuals or revenues versus expenses, but also talking to the vestry about the assets on the balance sheet, right? The things that you have that are part of your overall total financial picture, of which the endowment is one. Similarly, when you are talking to the endowment committee, you can be the one to remind them that the primary way that an endowment as an asset of the church actually has an impact on that church is through the distribution. A second opportunity that I've highlighted here is that the treasurer has an opportunity to be the bridge between the short term and the long term. Karsten was just mentioning that the endowment committee is really charged with having a long-term perspective because they are overseeing assets that are typically perpetual, right? Forever assets. And the treasurer and the vestry can be focused more on the near term, right? How did we do on our expenses last month? What is our bank account balance right now? One important opportunity for a treasurer in conversation with all of these groups is to acknowledge that there can be this difference in time horizons and to try to put their shorter term reports in a longer term context. So you can provide insight into future expected expenses. You can have informed forecasts for revenues and that can all be in addition to the reporting that you do on the here and now. We've also said several times already the importance of education. This is a really great opportunity in collaborative leadership for the treasurer to make sure that all of these parties are informed about the church's funds and accounts, all of them. In our experience working with hundreds of churches, we are very familiar with the fact that most churches have a variety of current and long-term funds, and those funds might be unrestricted or restricted. I cannot tell you how many times someone calls or emails us at ECF and says, our long-term treasurer has departed and we've found all these documents and we're just having trouble making sense of like what is this account information that they've left behind. I think an opportunity for the treasurer is to make sure that everyone leading the organization knows what funds exist, where they are, and what they are for. And that really goes right along with what Karsten said earlier about the opportunity to embrace transparency. We're all volunteers in these roles, and it is easy to say that there isn't enough time, but you're really not doing a service to the organization if you are the only one who knows that this fund at this bank was formed 50 years ago for the benefit of the church and it pays out this much. Other people have got to have that knowledge too. Sharing information across leaders builds trust, and it makes it more likely that your church can continue to go forward when you end your tenure, as you inevitably will. Although, maybe for those of you who are the treasurer, you may not feel that that's coming for you anytime soon. I want to talk finally about this fourth group that we highlighted, which is the clergy. So the clergy have many, many roles in a church, perhaps more than they ever imagined. And I'm just going to highlight here two that they have specific to this concept of healthy endowment. The first one is identifying the priorities at the church for carrying out the mission. Yes, ultimately, the vestry is going to be the one to determine how to put resources toward those priorities, but you as the clergy can be the leaders in identifying them. Or maybe it's better said as you are the one who can really crystallize from what is likely to be a very long list of things that everyone would love to achieve. What are the two or three most important priorities that we could put resources toward for mission in the next few years? And then as a clergy member, you are also in a role that makes it that where you can help coordinate across all of these groups to build consensus on the spending priorities. In terms of responsibilities, one thing that we wanted to highlight today is how important it is that clergy understand the components of prudent spending. Again, in my job, I speak to a lot of churches all day long from all parts of the country, and my sense from having those conversations is that spending rates can be a source of misunderstanding or even tension. And I think there are a number of reasons for this, but maybe the biggest one is just the fact that for any true endowment, the amount that can be spent in any year is only a small portion of that endowment's value. It's that prudent spending rate that Karsten mentioned earlier. And typically that looks like something around 3 to 5% of the endowment's market value. So if you have a $1 million endowment, for example, that might enable you to have $40,000 annually. Every church leader needs to understand this, including the clergy. We aren't planning to go into depth today on this topic, but I do want to note that Karsten and I have given a previous webinar on the topic of the truth about endowment spending, and a link to a replay of that webinar is on ECF's website. And related to this concept about prudent spending is the responsibility that the clergy have to communicate with the parish about how the endowment distribution supports priorities. As much as the treasurer, as the endowment committee, as the vestry, it's really the clergy person who is in front of the parish most often and being articulate about how all of your revenues support the mission and ministry of the church is a valuable thing for you as a clergy person to be able to do. And then, of course, the clergy are the only staff member among the four groups that we've been discussing today. And so, one of the things that they can do is to foster communication across these groups. And in its most basic form, what does that look like? I mean, it looks like making sure that meetings are happening that involve representatives from each one of these groups. When you create formal channels for communications that builds relationships, it creates accountability, and it gives you the opportunity to strengthen informal communications because people begin to really know each other and understand that they are all working together. So, what opportunities do the clergy have in collaborating to create a healthy endowment for their parish? So, we've mentioned a few times already that you need to understand your existing funds so that you can know what they are used for and develop ideas for new ones as needed. And the clergy have an important perspective here. You know, many times funds have just existed for years to benefit a church, and you, as today's leaders, are there to steward them now, and other people will be stewarding them in the future. What are these funds doing to support your mission today? Karsten commented at the beginning about the strategic focus of leadership, particularly for the vestry. And so taking the opportunity to take a step back and evaluate the goals and priorities that you, as the clergy, as the staff head of the church, are taking, and what those priorities look like against your existing programs, your existing spend, that can perhaps illuminate some opportunities that you have to do new things with resources you might already have, or to try to seek new resources to do them. You've got a really unique position in what we see as a collaborative review involving all these parties about what your funds are and how they connect to your priorities for ministry today. You can also help broaden the perspective of this group because clergy have really good insight into all the resources that the church has available for mission. So, yes, that is money in the form of current and long term unrestricted and restricted funds. But you know that you also have non monetary resources, things like your building, your community of relationships, your volunteers, your voice. The true ministry of the church does not only require money. Yes, it does require some money, but it does not only require money. It requires time and relationships. And when you are having discussions about money and perhaps they're becoming a bit tense or difficult, I think clergy are well positioned to broaden the perspective of those in the room and to help them remember their responsibilities and opportunities to grow and steward all of your other resources. And then finally, and somewhat more practically, Karsten mentioned earlier that the vestry really have an opportunity to make sure that new leaders have training. The clergy can partner with the vestry to make sure that this happens. There is a real risk of losing significant institutional knowledge when you have leadership transitions. At ECF, we have seen this happen so many times. And you, as the clergy, can reduce this risk for your church by putting in place processes and knowledge transfer that will help support a smooth transition. So, across the groups that we've talked about today, I hope we have illuminated for you these tremendous opportunities to collaborate to oversee the endowment while also having clarity about and respecting the unique roles and responsibilities of each party in this oversight. Our feeling at ECF is that when different leaders in a church are giving a consistent and coherent message about money, that automatically demonstrates to your parish that you have a collaborative nature and it will build trust. So I want to turn back to Karsten now to share a few of the benefits that we think this collaborative approach can bring to your parish.
Thank you, Anne. So obviously we've covered all of the roles and responsibilities for these four groups. They all have a role to play in the endowment, and I hope we've sort of spelled that out in kind of an outline form here. I want now to go through the possible benefits of working together to inspire you, we hope, to check on how collaborative leadership is working at your church. So first, with collaborative leadership, you are likely to improve your financial planning and decision making. This can happen when all church leaders understand the endowment, share missional goals to make sure the funds are in alignment, and then understand how the endowment value and its annual distribution fit into the church's entire financial picture. Second, you may be able to expand your use of the endowment for mission. Make sure investment decisions are directly related to the goals and needs that you actually have now, not the goals you once had or the goals you think you should have. Consider what amount of spending is permitted by looking at your governing documents as well as how your investments are expected to perform going forward. You can also look again to see the full range of permissible uses for your funds. You might be able to use old funds in new ways to better align with new goals. And third, church vitality can improve. Sound financial planning and full disclosure can lead to improved trust at church. Anne was just touching on this. People want to be where they can trust and are trusted. A church with a clear mission backed up by monetary support is an exciting place to be. You can just imagine someone saying, I belong to St. John's Church. We focus a lot on whatever, our prison ministry, whatever, and we've raised a lot of funds for that. It's so great to be involved. It's really exciting to see what you're doing as a parishioner or as a leader fits into the financial resources and other resources of a church. It's really exciting and galvanizing to have that information and to know how you are a part of it. So again, allow each group to bring its expertise, but work together and share information as you go to make the very best possible endowment decisions for your church. So that's where we're going to end today. We have plenty of time for questions. I see some of it in the chat. I'm going to do a little goggly eyes. My eyes are going to go in different directions here for 1 second, but you are also more than welcome to get in touch with either one of us afterwards, either Anne or me. We'll share our contact information as we wrap up in a moment. And now just let me take a look here at the chat. So um, one question here, which actually is quite interesting always, is how does an endowment development committee, people charged with raising new gifts to an endowment, navigate the tension between endowment gifts and annual stewardship needs. So, Anne, I know this is right in your wheelhouse.
Yes, yes, this is a question we hear so often at ECF. So many times, right, an endowment gift is a legacy gift, a gift at end of life. That is a very different type of gift than a annual pledge or your annual giving campaign where you're inviting people to give current resources for the church right now. You can easily talk to people about the opportunity to give now and also to remember the church as part of their legacy. And those don't have to compete with one another. In fact, they can be complementary. There is then an additional consideration, which is if you do want to run what I would call a sort of endowment campaign where you are trying to seek current gifts, like gifts right now to help build an endowment. So in one case, you're seeking commitments for a future gift to the endowment, a legacy gift. Slightly different if you are trying to ask people for current gifts today as part of building an endowment. Absolutely, you can do this. It does require coordination. Karsten and I, in preparing our remarks today, talked about some other groups that we could have gone through, and I think we wanted to keep it very focused on those that are most closely related to overseeing the endowment. But if you have a stewardship committee at your church, that is another group that needs to be engaged. Because absolutely you need to talk to them about any plans to run a current gift endowment campaign and think about how it aligns with any annual giving that you do. Again, you can do it. We have seen churches do it. We have seen them do it successfully. In fact, often if you are running a capital campaign where you're raising specific funds for building and you're getting excitement around that, you can think about structuring your capital campaign to be about your building projects, to be about building your endowment, and to be about the commitments people will continue to make for annual operations. And that can often be an exciting way to gain current gifts to the endowment and then sort of take a pause, right? You're not asking for current gifts to the endowment every year. You're probably running a concerted campaign for current gifts and then always inviting the opportunity to make legacy commitments to fund the endowment in the future.
Yeah. So, Anne, just on that in terms of roles, and then we have questions on a different set of topics, which I'll get to in just a moment. But we also have a question about these different roles, these four groups. What do you do if you're in a small church and everyone is wearing multiple hats? So, just a few
Yes.
thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, in a way, you have it slightly easier because you have fewer people that you need to involve in all of the decisions. But it is important that you do try to identify who is wearing what hat and when they're speaking, what is it that they're focused on. So if you're not going to have a separate endowment committee, and we are very aware that there are churches who just don't have that, and instead it's going to be a smaller committee of your vestry, or it's going to be a responsibility of a finance committee, for example, because you're not going to set up a separate committee. Allow yourself in the agenda to have a specific line item about that and just give people a chance to like put on their investment committee long-term hat and then take that off and go back to talking about, how do we do this month and what's the balance in our checking account. But even when you are small, you do still have the obligation and responsibility to oversee all these assets and to think about them in the short, medium, and long term. I would also say a committee does not need to be 9 or 12 people. In fact, and Karsten and I talked to a lot of churches, some of the most effective endowment committees that we have seen are actually 3 people, right? And they are 3 people, one of whom at a minimum is very excited about and committed to the endowment and to talking about that with other people. So again, you may be a small church and maybe even finding 3 additional people above and beyond folks with other responsibilities just isn't possible. But when we're saying an endowment committee, I don't want you to think that somehow we're talking about a giant group. It can be 3 people, and 3 people can be very effective.
Great. We've also gotten a number of questions about how ECF works with churches, our services, etc. And I don't want to go into that in too much detail on a webinar for everybody, but I just want to mention we're very happy to talk one-on-one. We can see who's asking questions to talk one-on-one. And I'll just mention, I mean, our general perspective is um, number one, I mean, you have to have effective and good and sound up-to-date investment management, but then all of these other pieces that we're talking about today, your investment policies, your structure and governance around the investment, and all the thoughts about how are we talking about the endowment at our church, partly for all the reasons we've talked about today, but partly as a way of setting the stage for asking for new endowment gifts. I mean, we really baked all of these different features in. It's not just investment management when you work with us, it's this and a little bit more. And we offer also are very fortunate to be able to offer a fair amount of flexibility because our main perspective is that we want to help you meet your goals. So we always start by understanding what have you got? What are you doing? What do you want to do? And we sort of start from there and help you make the very best decisions. And we really walk right alongside our clients in helping them make the good decisions. So we're going to follow up directly with some of you, but we're a nonprofit and we really greatly enjoy spending time with our clients. We really feel like we have the gift of time to spend with all of you. So I do, have another question here. I guess it goes back again and to sort of the balance. It's related to this and related to the decision making we've been talking about throughout. I mean, who at the church makes the ultimate decisions? Does the church make investment decisions? Does the investment manager that they select make the investment decisions, and where's the right balance between the two?
Sure, yeah. So you may be familiar with a concept called discretionary investment authority, or the ability to delegate certain aspects of investment decision making. And we typically advise all churches to take that approach because you are unlikely to have people in your parish who can handle the day-to-day investment management. And so you can, and there are many managers, ECF is one, you can turn over discretionary investment authority. But what you retain as the church is the strategic decisions. So Carson was just saying, part of what is important in investing is understanding what are your goals, what's the time horizon of your funds, what's your risk tolerance as a church, as a committee, what are your spending needs. We spend a lot of time up front with churches talking through some of the laws around permanent endowments. So when you have been given an endowment where the donor's intent is that it be maintained in perpetuity, you have some special things to consider related to spending. So we talk through all of those. That helps you ultimately make the strategic decisions for the church, but then you can delegate all the rest of it. And then Carson said earlier, oversight is not a passive activity. So you will oversee that investment manager to whom you have delegated the activities, but you will not have the responsibility for deciding what particular investment fund or when should we rebalance or these other things. You can have those be someone else's responsibility and free yourselves from needing to do that. And especially if you are a smaller church, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I want just to follow on that. Another way to think about it is we want you to make the decisions in the areas that you know best. Only you know what your goals are, right? You want to delegate some investment management capacity to the investment managers to work in the area that they know best, right? What percentage of your portfolio should be placed in different, you know, asset classes or whatnot. And so that's really where we like to see the split. And we really partner with our clients right along the way because we know that sometimes it takes a little time to, as we're talking about here, collaboratively as a church, these different groups gather around, these big concepts. What are our goals? What is our risk tolerance? And it's really wonderful when you have a partner, an outside partner who will do that with you. So I want to just wrap up with one more question. Um, and this gets back to the congregation. So we've talked a lot about the four leadership groups here talking together. the congregation is also your audience. So the question really is, we share our budget with the congregation, and the
Yep.
budget shows the annual as a number, the annual number that comes from our endowment into the budget. Is that enough for talking with the congregation, or is there more? Should we be doing more with the congregation to be more collaborative with them as well?
Love that question. Yes, I commend you for sharing your budgets and being clear with the parish about what the vestry has authorized for the next year. Also, a number is just a number, and often numbers lack meaning for a lot of people who maybe don't see how that number connects to your mission and ministry. So, in addition to sharing the numbers of the budget, I would really encourage you to think about talking about what is the impact of that money. And the endowment committee can be thinking specifically about how they are going to talk about the impact that the endowment distribution has on the church. Again, I don't want to make this seem like this is some difficult exercise, right? It could be two sentences that you are putting together and are able to use regularly in your coffee hour dialogue with people, or in the quarterly note that you send out in your parish newsletter about the updates on finances and updates on how the endowment is doing. But not just giving the numbers, because again, money is only like one piece of what matters at your church. So talking about why that money has impact, what it's doing, that is what is going to give your parish a better understanding of the meaning behind what you are doing with this asset.
Yeah, great. Okay, so for those of you who had some specific questions, we'll follow up with you individually. And with that, we're going to wrap up. So, Anne, I'm just going to give it back to you for a moment.
Thank you so much, Carson. Thank you for fielding all of those questions. So I did not have to look through the chat, but I do look forward to looking afterwards, seeing everything that you all shared. So, as we are closing today, I just want to say how grateful we are to have had the opportunity to spend some time with you. It really is my favorite part of my role at ECF to get to talk to churches from around the country and help to address their endowment management needs. So, if you've heard something today that has sparked your interest or generated additional questions that maybe you didn't want to put in the chat, you can absolutely reach out to either one of us by phone or email. You see our contact information here on the screen. And as Laura said at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded. EPN will post the recording and this presentation that we shared with you on their website in a few days. So if you have others at your parish who you'd like to share this with, please check their website at episcopalparishes.org for the replay. And on behalf of both the Episcopal Church Foundation and the Episcopal Parish Network, thank you very much for attending our webinar today.